Welcome to Handicap Moves and Shakers, episode 9, I think we're on now. For those who haven't watched before, welcome along. And it is just a series of videos where I take a look at the revised BHA handicap marks, which get released every Tuesday morning at 7 AM, and offer my opinions on what's becoming well handicapped, what's not well handicapped, and just ideas that might shape my punting angles going forward. A reminder that these handicap marks run from a Sunday to a Saturday, so if you were interested to see a horse that had run on a Sunday, you have to wait an additional 10 days. Not a huge amount to get stuck into this week by virtue of the fact that the weather gods have played havoc. Lots of rain, meaning lots of abandonments, lots of horses being withdrawn because of the testing conditions, and indeed in some situations travel plans being fairly difficult. It's fair to say I think that Mr. Handicapper is not enjoying the British weather because he appears to be in somewhat of a bad mood. He's dished out some absolutely phenomenal rises this week. Just a few off the top of my head. Patron up £17 for his win in the King Henry VIII novice chase at Sandown. Now, don't get me wrong, it was a very good performance. Then Deafening Silence up £13 for winning the Grade 2 novice at Sandown on the Friday, and Colonel Harry up £11 for placing in the King Henry VIII. Now, they were all good performances, but personally, from my punting angles, I don't take form on ground as desperate as it was at Sandown and Aintree at the weekend. I'm loath to take that literally. I think that's a fairly quick route to the poorhouse from personal experience, and yet the handicapper seems to have taken it literally. For example, Le Patron up 17 and Colonel Harry up 11. He appears to have used JPR1 there as the form line and handicapped them around him, and he has JPR1 running to his mark, which I think was 145. Now, I was pretty impressed with JPR1. Personally, in my notes, I've upgraded his run because I didn't think he was going to enjoy that ground. I had him as a horse to oppose. I actually opposed him with poor old Isio, who sadly is no more with us. Thought he would have liked the ground. Didn't think JPR1 would, and I stand by that. I think it was his class that got him still in there pitching at the second last, where he made a pretty bad mistake down his nose, sort of over jumped a little bit as he did at Cheltenham, which is a slightly worrying reoccurrence. Brendan Powell had to pick him up off his nose and then send him forward again. Well, we know that he's lost lengths for the mistake. He's then had to regather his momentum, which at the back of a race up a hill is always a tough thing to do. You see it time and time again at Sandown and at particularly Cheltenham. And on top of that, he's had to do that on very testing ground. So I think his run can be upgraded, but I don't think he ran to his level. I think that, he ran below that, and yet the handicapper has handicapped it literally. So certainly you would imagine that Mr. Gary Moore and Mr. Jamie Snowden are probably revising their Christmas gift for the handicapper, and it might be downgraded to a bottle of wine from a case of wine, because I think those are pretty harsh rises in the weights. So we'll start with the horses going up, and we'll start with O'Connell, who's gone up £6 to a mark of 110 for his win at Market Raising over 3 miles at the beginning of last week. It was a really impressive performance. He travelled very powerfully, he jumped very well, and he stayed on much the best of these in a race that perhaps lost one of its angles when Roger Rarebit failed to raise a gallop, but went very well for Nick Scofield, who's linking up to good effect with Sue Smith, forming quite a nice partnership. Nick has sort of had to get his career going again after suffering a pretty nasty injury last season, but rides very well, and I thought this horse suited his style. Travelled quietly into the race, got there cruising, and was never in doubt. It's up to 110s. Of course, he can run off top weight in 0 to 110s. He'll get in off a very nice low weight if he went up in grade. And I think perhaps up in grade might be the way they'll go, because his ability to travel will surely see him into good effect. So I thought £6 was a pretty lenient rise for O'Connell. I'm sure he'll go in again. Soft ground seems to really suit him. He's one to definitely put in your tracker. Jumping forward all the way to Saturday to Aintree, the final race of the day, Sonigino was really impressive in the 2 mile 4 handicap hurdle. If you followed me on the SBK betting podcast, where he was my pretty confident nap, it has to be said, you were never really in doubt that you were going to collect. He travelled much the best, turned into the straight, still swinging along, jumped the last, and I don't think Harry Cobden had to get all that serious with him to run out a pretty ready winner. He's got up £6 for that to a mark of 143. Just wonder what they'll do next with him. There had been talk that he might have had 1 or 2 run over hurdles and then go novice chasing, but surely off the back of this performance, he's worth keeping over hurdles this year. Still a young horse, plenty of time to go chasing next year and have a full season at it. Possibly the Coral Trophy, but I wondered whether actually the per attempts might be the way they go. To win that race over 2 mile 4 on desperate ground clearly requires some pretty good depth and stamina, and I just wonder whether the per attempts might be the way they might go with him. So keep an eye out for him maybe popping up in a per attempt qualifier off a mark of 143. I do think he's still well handicapped, provided you don't drop him back in trip. He's tried 2 miles a few times now, and I just think he gets outpaced over that trip. Also on Saturday, but at Sandown, was Haddex Des Obeaux, who's gone up £7 to a mark of 157. He ran really well in the Tingle Creek. I think he was beaten just under 5 lengths. Jumped beautifully for Jack Tudor, and really was in there pitching the whole way. But he might now find himself slightly in no man's land, because I think for all that he's a lightly raced horse with room still for more progression, I do think if he was going to beat John Bon and to a lesser degree Edward Stone at level weights in this sort of contest, Sandown on soft testing ground probably was his best chance, for all that he might have a little bit more improvement. It was only his 6th run over fences. John Bon was his 8th run, so there is maybe a little bit more upside to him, but I would have been really interested in him if he'd have got a 3, maybe even £4 rise for the Grand Annual. Gary Moore ran Editor du Gite off 153 in the Grand Annual a couple of seasons ago, so he's not afraid to run one off a lofty mark, but I think 157 might just be asking a bit too much. So Hadexobo might just be in a little bit of no man's land for the time being. It will be interesting to see where they go next, and that might well give you an idea as to what they plan on doing with him. Gary Moore also had a good winner on Sandown at Saturday with Spirit de Nou. Now Gary Moore's horse is clearly coming back into form, having been very quiet. He's starting to fire the winners in now, so it's a stable you should be following. But Spirit de Nou won a 2 mile handicap hurdle in really impressive style. But he's gone up £10 to a mark of 139. Now I'm just not sure that that's thoroughly deserved. The runner-up is very lightly raced, came from France and Venetia Williams, had 1 run in a maiden hurdle where he beat a well-fancied horse of Dan Skelton's, who's yet to run again. So the form line is very difficult to get a grasp on, but my instinct tells me that £10 on for a rise of that run on very testing ground where they finish very spread out. Just for me, I think I would look to oppose Spirit de Nou next time, and think that he's perhaps got a mark above where he should be. But that was one that I struggled to get a grasp on, but I just thought £10 was a big enough rise, considering to me he looked to be the only one to truly handle conditions. Moving on now to a couple of horses that are coming down. Collector's Item ran in the 3 mile handicap chase at Sandown. Just got hopelessly outpaced the whole way, really. He was never really travelling with any ease. But he's come down now £1 to a mark of 129, and I was just really taken with how he stayed on at the death. I mean, if you watch it, he's out of camera shot from pretty much the second last until about 10 strides from the line, where he's finishing very powerfully. I think he might just be a horse that needs an extreme trip. So as such, maybe a sort of a regional national might suit, or maybe even the Grand National Trial at Haydock. So a nice long straight, testing soft ground, real stamina test. I thought Collector's Item for John Joe O'Neill might be a horse that can land a decent handicap pot. And then one open at Aintree where I didn't want to touch the chase form, if I'm honest. I thought it was pretty unpleasant watching, if I'm honest, apart from the Beecher Chase, where I thought the jockeys rode with great intelligence. But Heltenham for the Skeleton Yard, he clearly just hated the ground, and as such, he's been dropped £1 to a mark of 133. I wouldn't have been fussed if he hadn't been dropped at all, but I think this is a horse that's still very well handicapped. He's a very talented performer, and as long as he's not on ground as desperate as that, I would stay with him. I think he's still got more yet to give. But what I would say is anything that ran at Aintree on Saturday, you wouldn't want to see out for a good bit yet. I think anything that turns out quickly, I would automatically oppose, because I think everything had a really tough race. I mean, Richmond Lake, who won that race with Heltenham, I mean, he needed a step ladder over the last fence and barely walked to the line. It was pretty attritional stuff, so I would imagine all of those are going to need a good break to freshen up to get back to their best. And then finishing off with 3 non-movers. I'd already mentioned Roger Rarebit, who didn't raise a gallop at Market Raising, was quite disappointing, but was very weak in the market beforehand. Connor Ring riding for Tom Lacey, not a usual matchup, but as it was, he bled as well. I mean, he barely went to circuit. but the veterinary report on the steward's site says that he had bled, so that would explain that. He stays on a mark of 110, and I think in a top weight in a 0 to 110, he's a surefire winner going forward, providing they can get on top of that bleeding issue. I would have a little bit more of a concern with him going up in grade. I think he's a little bit of a moody character and likes to dominate, and I think he's got more chance of doing that against a lesser quality of horse, albeit with more weight on his back. And then another one that caught the eye was Josh the Boss, who unseated at the last in the Grade 2 novice hurdle at Sandown on Friday. He travelled very powerfully through the race, was probably coming off second best at the time of departing, but you just never know up Sandown Hill how horses might have stayed or otherwise. It was a pretty soft unseat, but he stays on a mark of 128. I think if Nigel Twiston-Davies sends him to a handicap hurdle, I think a mark of 128 is a very fair mark. Just the issue is, unfortunately, as I mentioned, it was a soft unseat. He tends to be ridden by the owner's relative, and lovely lad though he is, he's just, for me, not a jockey that I can really get overly trustworthy with. For all that he claims £7, I'm not sure he's actually valued for that £7. So if Sam Twiston-Davies jumped on board, or one of the more established yard conditionals, I think 128 for Josh the Boss in a handicap hurdle, I think is a really lenient mark. So do keep an eye on him. But as I said, for me, the jockey would be a contributing factor to whether I want to do with him or against him. And then to finish off with, Petit Tonnerre finished 4th in the King Henry VIII chase, just outpaced the whole way. They persisted with 2 miles. He was running a pretty decent race all the same. He stays on 138, and I think if he goes up in trip 2 mile 4, this is a ready winner in waiting. All his best hurdle form came over 2 mile 4. They've obviously tried dropping back in trip over fences, and he just perhaps lacks that little bit of tactical speed. But his jumping was secure this time, and Petit Tonnerre for JP and John Joe. Maybe over the Christmas period they might find a nice handicap pot for him somewhere. So that wraps up Handicap Movers and Shakers episode 9. I hope you enjoyed the shortened format, and we'll see you soon. Please remember to like and subscribe.